In today's video, I'm going to be talking about a topic that many of us struggle with, but not many people talk about, and that is binge eating. If you're feeling out of control when it comes to food and you're feeling frustrated with yourself, but you still have a body composition goal you want to achieve, stick around because I'm going to be talking about exactly how you can break that cycle and finally get the body that you want. Identify your triggers. There's no such thing as a perfect diet. If you stuff up, it's okay. No, there are no such thing as foods that's going to directly make you gain body fat, even if you've had a little bit of it. Is the moment where you'll feel so much more freedom around food. You can learn that even if you did happen to overeat one day, you can make it up without actually having to restrict or punish yourself. Instead of restricting, we're adding to make it more filling. Turn it all off. Actually be mindful when you're eating. First, let's talk about why binge eating happens in the first place. Binge eating occurs because we're restricting ourselves. And what happens after we restrict ourselves is that we binge, and when we binge, we want to restrict further. So you can see how we can get ourselves in that constant cycle. And when you're in that cycle, it can feel really hard to get yourself out of it. So identifying why binge eating happens, and that is from restricting ourselves, is the first thing that we need to do to be able to break that cycle, is identifying that trigger in the first place. So the first step is ditching the all or nothing mentality. If you have this kind of mentality, you're going to be someone who is more prone to want to binge eat. Remember, being perfect when it comes to your diet doesn't exist. If you expect yourself to be perfect all of the time, you're going to be feeling guilty, and then you're going to be starting that cycle for yourself. So remember, perfect doesn't exist. When you stop labeling foods as good or bad, and that you know there are no such thing as foods that's going to directly make you gain body fat, even if you've had a little bit of it, is the moment where you'll feel so much more freedom around food. This is why I encourage learning about flexible dieting and learning about macronutrients, and that there's no good or bad foods. When we're eating foods, your body is not thinking, is this healthy, is this unhealthy? It's just breaking down the protein, carbs, and fats and the overall calories of the food. So remember, there's no such thing as a perfect diet. If you stuff up, it's okay, because if you learn flexible dieting and macro borrowing, you can learn that even if you did happen to overeat one day, you can make it up without actually having to restrict or punish yourself in a really negative way that it's going to cause you to want to binge eat further. So the next step is making sure that you're fueling your body consistently. So one of the key pieces of advice that I give clients who may struggle with binge eating is, instead of thinking, how can I make this meal smaller to ensure that I'm achieving my physique goal, it's instead, how can I add to this meal to make it more satiating, to make it more filling, okay? So instead of restricting, we're adding to make it more filling, okay? So even though you might be adding more calories in now, you're technically in the long term going to be saving yourself calories, because you're not going to want to binge because you're so full and satiated from that meal. So ask yourself, how can I make this meal more filling, more satiating, and more filled with more protein, to be able to ensure that I'm staying fuller for longer, that my cravings are satisfied, that I'm emotionally and physically full after eating. So how can I add and make sure that I'm actually fueling myself properly? The next step is to identify your triggers. When are you binge eating? Are you binge eating when everyone finally leaves the house? Or are you binge eating when you get home from work and you realize that you haven't eaten, so you want to eat everything inside? Have a journal, write down and notice when you're actually finding yourself binge eating, because the sooner you can identify that, we already know it's from restricting, but what moments of the day are you binging, okay? Be aware of that, and then we can put some things into place to ensure that we're avoiding that happening. So we're avoiding you going too hungry, so that you're staying full throughout the day. Maybe you need to have some more frequent meals more often. And whilst you might initially have to have a little bit more calories earlier on in the day, and that can seem scary at first, it's going to be less calories ultimately if it's stopping you from binge eating and wanting to over consume calories. So step 4 would be to practice mindful eating. I know we've all heard this and it can sound so boring, but it is so true. You should not be watching any TV, any social media whilst you're eating your food. Turn it all off. Actually be mindful when you're eating. Count how many chews that you're eating per bite. breathe in between eating, and just be really aware. Try and use all of your 5 senses when you're eating. How does it smell? How does it taste? How does it look? How does it feel inside my mouth? So try and use all of your senses when eating, and that's going to help you with your mindful eating and just being super aware that you're actually eating a meal. And a lot of people can think that they're hungry. However, a lot of the time you're dehydrated. So make sure that in between bites, you're drinking enough water, that you're drinking at least 3 liters of water a day at the very minimum. You need to make sure that you're staying hydrated. Otherwise, your body's going to think that you're just hungry and you're going to overeat calories. So make sure that you're filling yourself proper H2O, proper food, you're having balanced meals. Protein is the most satiating macro, so make sure that every single meal you have that protein in there. But overall, just being mindful and practice mindful eating and just being aware of that. And I know it's so basic, and I know that we've heard it all before, and if you're someone who has experienced binge eating and you've looked into binge eating before, you're going to hear everyone say this, but the art of repetition, being told something, sometimes we do need to be told something a few times, which is why I bother bringing it up, because it is still really important that you do know this and that you do still take it into account, is making sure that you're actually being mindful. So if you're eating right now, pause the video, eat, and then come back to it. The next piece of advice that I would give you is to work with an expert who is familiar with binge eating. Because it's one thing to work with a coach on your physique goals, but it's another thing to work with a coach on your physique goals who understands binge eating. Those are 2 very different kinds of coaches. If you're working with a coach because you have physique goals, and by coach I mean whether they're like a nutritionist or personal trainer or both, as I am both as well, you want to ensure that the coach that you are working with, if you overeat and that you binge, that the coach isn't going to punish you or tell you to eat less calories as a result. You want to make sure that the coach that you're working with understands why binge eating occurs in the first place, and that they're not going to restrict you, and if anything, they're going to tell you jump straight back on track as if you had never even binged, because that's going to be the best thing that you need. So work with an expert who understands it. It's one thing to work with a sports nutritionist and personal trainer, but it's another thing to work with someone who understands binge eating and who has even been through it themselves. And of course, with that, I'm going to plug my coaching, because that is exactly what I do. I myself have overcome binge eating. I know it can be really difficult and it can feel really lonely, but if you've got the right guidance on your path, I've helped literally hundreds of clients overcome binge eating and still get the body that they want, and they've broken the cycle for good. And I can help you do the exact same with my coaching services. So make sure you go check out my Instagram as well at Jasmine Templin Fitness for client results. But that being said, guys, I'm going to wrap up this video here. I hope you guys got some good insight in terms of helpful tips that you can implement when it comes to still achieving your body composition goals, but also breaking the cycle of binge eating. It can be tough, but I know you can do it. And if you have any other questions around binge eating and how to break the cycle, feel free to even just DM me on Instagram. I would love to help and we can have a chat. But I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure to subscribe, and thanks so much for watching.